Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can continue to grow this channel. Today what we're going to be talking about is how to grow your CV in graduate school so that you can land the postdoc position that you want. So we're going to break this part up into different areas based on what I think are the most important. So this won't cover things necessarily like finishing your dissertation and defending your dissertation, because those are things that you're going to have to do in order to complete your degree. These are the extras, the things that really will make you stand out from other people that are applying for postdocs. I think one common misconception is that people think doing your PhD is the most important thing. And yes, it is the most important thing, because without it you can't do anything else. But at the same time, when you apply for a postdoc position, don't forget that everybody else that's applying for that postdoc position also has a PhD. You're no different than everybody else. So what you need to do in graduate school, and then again in a postdoc, is find ways to separate yourself and make you stand out from the pack. So these are the things kind of in order of importance in my mind, what you need to do in order to make yourself stand out from everybody else. So the first thing that you need to do, far and above everything else, is publish. Publish, publish, publish. You will hear the term publish or perish, or that publishing papers is the academic currency, and these are 100% true. Productivity is almost completely measured by what you publish, especially when you're younger and you don't necessarily have to secure grant funding. If you go through a PhD and you didn't publish anything, there's a joke that I heard. It's something like, if you've gone through your PhD and you haven't published anything, did you really do a PhD? Did you really do any research? And I think there's some truth to that. The best dissertation is a finished dissertation. An even greater dissertation than that is one that's been published. So the first thing you need to do is publish. Now, for a lot of you, this won't be a big issue because a lot of departments are going to require you to publish your work anyways. For those of you that don't require it in your department, you really need to work with your PI on making sure that you get something published. At least one paper. If you don't have one paper published when you're done with your graduate school, it's going to be hard to secure a postdoc position. That's just the truth. And publish early. Earlier the better, because if you don't publish anything until you finished graduate school, well, then that means you're trying to look for a postdoc without anything published. So the earlier you can publish something, the better. Now, a common question is, how many publications do I need to have? So a lot of departments, their requirement for graduation is that you have one paper. You have to have one paper published. My PhD advisor had his own requirement that was you needed 2 papers published. So what do you really need? I've seen people that have landed postdoc positions at the Mayo Clinic with 1 paper, and I've seen people that have landed positions at Harvard with 1 paper. So yes, you can land good positions with just 1 paper. However, it becomes much more tricky, and there's a lot more work you have to do to land those positions. I would say to really be competitive, you need to have 2 first author papers by the time you finish graduate school. That is going to make sure that you've established yourself as someone that can be productive. And when I say first author papers, what I'm referring to is original research. We'll talk about reviews in a second, but I'm talking about original research. Now, if you were lucky enough that you could have 3 papers, that's even better. Publishing 3 papers really makes you stand out as someone that really went above and beyond as a PhD student, and will really make you seem like an outstanding candidate. But in a realistic sense, I think 2 is a reasonable thing to ask for and what you should be aiming for. Now, that's for original research. So what else can you do as far as publishing to make your CV stand out more? So as I said, another thing you could do is review articles or commentaries. So commentaries are a little harder because usually it's only 1 author, maybe 2 authors on commentaries. But review articles are definitely something you could get involved with. So at the bare minimum, if your PI is writing a review article, you should ask to be able to help with that review article so that you can be listed as a co-author. That's at the minimum. What would be even better though, and what I think that everyone should strive to do, is for at least 1 review article, you should go to your PI and say, next time you're asked to write a review article, even if it's for a smaller journal, can you let me be the first author? And by doing so, that gives you the ability to say, I've had 2 first author papers on original research, and I've had 1 first author on a review article. And a lot of PIs will be okay with this. Now, they're not just going to give you first author on the review article, you're going to have to do some work for it. But they'll help you work through it. And I think this is also a beneficial thing for you. When you go to your postdoc, a lot of PIs are going to assume that you could do a lot of different things, including writing and putting together a review article. Putting together a review article is a little different than putting together an original research article. It takes a little different skill set, and you have to tweak it based on your audience and kind of come up with a focus of what you want to talk about. You're not just throwing random things into that review article. So I think this is beneficial for you in the long term, but I think it also is going to go a long way to building your CV. So now that you've done this, you have 2 first author articles, that's original research, and you have 1 review article that you're first author on. What else can you do to build your CV? The next thing that you need to do is you need to go to conferences. Once a year, you should be going to a conference and presenting your work. Now, during the first year, you may not go to a conference because you don't have any research to present, and that's fine. But as you get to your 2nd and 3rd and 4th year, you should be going and presenting posters. If possible, try to secure an oral presentation. That looks even better, but at least show that you've been going to conferences and you've been presenting research, because this is where you start to learn how to network. And we'll have a whole video about networking at conferences in a future date, but I think that's something important to keep in mind. But that's another thing that you could add. Now, the last 2 things that I think that everyone should try to do that will really make you stand out from people. So the first one is peer review. This is something that I see hardly any graduate students do, and it was something that I did, and I think that it made a big difference. So I'm sure everyone here is familiar with peer review, especially if you're thinking about publishing something. And if you're not familiar with what peer review is, just briefly what it is when you submit an article for publication, it gets sent to experts in that field, and they're the ones that review those articles. And they provide criticisms and critiques, and there's a back and forth dialogue between the reviewers and the authors, and this is how publications ultimately go through and become accepted and then are published. But what I don't see a lot of grad students doing is peer reviewing. Now, when you're a graduate student, it's very hard for you to be invited to review an article because most likely you haven't published anything, so the editors at journals don't know who you are. There's no way for them to invite you. But probably your PI has been invited or will be invited to review different articles. Certainly by the time you get to a more senior postdoc position, you're already starting to be asked to review for articles. I get asked once every couple weeks to review a different article. Now, there's 2 reasons that reviewing for peer review as a graduate student is going to help you. The first is pertaining to this video, and that has to do with the fact that there's very few graduate students that do this. So if you could put on your CV that you've peer reviewed research, what it does is separate you from the pack. And that's what the point of doing these things are, is you're trying to separate yourself from the pack. So the way that you go about doing this is you go to your PI and you ask him or her, next time you're asked to peer review an article, can I also co-peer review with it? Review this article with you. And most likely they'll say yes. And what they'll do is when they get some articles sent to them, what they'll do is they'll email the editor of the journal and they'll say, hi, I would like so-and-so who's a graduate student in my lab to peer review this article with me. Is that fine? And usually the editor will say that's fine. Usually they really don't have a problem with that. And so what'll happen then is, in a lot of instances, you kind of do it together. So the PI will give you the article, and they'll take the article, you both read through it, come up with what you think needs to be changed in the article, and then talk about it and kind of come to a consensus. And this teaches you how to peer review an article, because this is actually a skill that's very difficult to do, how to appropriately critique an article. So it depends on the scope of the paper, where it's being submitted to, what the authors didn't include or did include. There's a lot that goes into it, so it's very difficult to peer review a paper correctly, and it takes quite a bit of practice. But when you do this, you can add this to your CV. Peer reviewing articles is definitely something you could add to your CV. And this definitely will set you apart from everybody else, because I promise you, out of the 100 applications that PIs get to join their lab, there might be only a handful of people that have peer reviewed a paper. So this will make you stand out. The second thing it does is it lets editors know who you are and kind of gets them to think they could send you other papers. And that's good, because then as you become a postdoc, you start to be asked to peer review more papers, and next thing you know, you have a list of 10 different journals that you've reviewed for that you yourself have been asked to do. And so as you move to the next stage in your career, you've already built this network of editors that are willing to send you manuscripts. Now, the last thing that you should consider doing, and this is something that you really need to think about because it's going to take a lot of work and there's no guarantee that you get a result at the end, and this is to apply for NIH funding. So at the NIH, they have something that's called a F31. What an F31 is a fellowship application for graduate students. So similar to an R01, what you're going to do is you're going to come up with a research strategy. You're going to gather some preliminary data, which you've already been doing in the lab. You're going to put it together with what your aims are, which again is similar to your proposal that you're going to work on. So a lot of this work is already done. You're going to put that together along with some personal statements and other attachments that you need for NIH applications, such as biosketches and facilities and other general attachments, and you're going to submit to NIH. And if you get it, essentially what it's going to do is pay for your salary. It's not really going to pay for any of the work you do. It'll give you some money for travel and for some health insurance, but that really is on the back end. You won't see the money, but this is a really crucial thing. There's no guarantee that you'll get it, but if you do get it, it really, really, really will set you apart from everybody else. And the reason that this is important to do is because depending on where you go, you may be required to secure funding. So a lot of labs at Harvard require that you carry your own funding. The PI will fund you for some period of time, but they really typically don't want to pay your salary. So by being able to show that you can secure funding, you become a very attractive candidate. So in the ideal world, what you've done is you've published 2 papers, a review article, you've done some peer review, you've gone to conferences to present, and you've secured a F31. The other option for funding is a T32, which are available to undergrads, and while those are good, I think that the F31 is something that will look even better because it's not an institutional grant. Now, if you've done all of those things and you've managed to do all of them, or even most of them, you are pretty set. You are someone that is looking at that point to get a very high level postdoc position. It may not be your top choice, but you definitely will get something good. Now, other things that you can do to improve your CV, working with other people in the lab so you get co-authorships. That'll show that you could work as a team, and it's going to add length to the amount of publications that are on your CV. So make sure at any opportunity that you can that you work with others so that you could get co-authorships. Apply for different awards. So this is something I didn't realize until I was a little bit ahead. Even at the level of PI, a lot of awards that people win are ones that they submit applications for themselves, or they ask somebody else, can you please submit for me? Don't think that someone's going to submit an application for you to win any sort of award, even your PI. They probably won't. So you need to be proactive and either ask somebody to and send them your CV and what you're looking for, or you need to do it on your own behalf. So don't be afraid to do that. Likewise, sometimes things that you can include on your CV, especially at early stages, are internal awards. So if there's every semester your department has presentations for data and you win the best presentation award, or if you go to a conference and you win an award for an abstract, anything like that are definitely things that you want to include on your CV. The last piece of advice I'll give you about building your CV, that applies for undergrads. It doesn't really apply for postdocs anymore, except if you're going to industry, and that's a different thing. But for undergrads, this matters. Um, on your CV, you can list what are the different techniques that you know in the lab. So if you've worked with animals before, what are the techniques that you know about working with animals? If you've done molecular work, what molecular work do you know? These are things that you could add on your CV that make a big difference. And it's important to list everything, even if it's something that doesn't pertain to the lab that you're going to. And the reason for that is, while a PI would like for you to have a good foundation and understand a good amount of the experiments that you're going to do in their lab, you don't need to know everything. It's still training when you're doing a postdoc, and they understand that, and there's still learning you'll do, and you'll learn new techniques. But if you could demonstrate that you know a technique that maybe they're interested in, and you may not even know that they're interested in it, they may want to take you to their lab because they want to integrate that technique into their lab. So, for example, in our lab, we have somebody that has experience with mass spec. And this is something that our PIs wanted to integrate into the lab, is more knowledge about lipid species and about mass spec. And so it was very attractive for her to take in this particular postdoc. So these are things that I hope you consider when you start trying to think about how to build up your CV for applying for a postdoc. And again, you won't get every single one of these. Maybe you only have one paper, or maybe you don't get funding, or maybe something else happens and you only go to one conference, you don't go to many conferences. That's fine. Not everyone's going to have a perfect CV. And the point of a CV is it's something that can grow over time organically. So don't try to force it, but remember that you only have a few years. So if you're in a PhD for 5 years total, by the time you're in that 4th year, what your CV looks like is what it's going to be when you send out applications. So the earlier you could start doing these things, the better. So with that, I want to say thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.